So far, I've had the chance to check out world history with Oversimplified and theology with Salmonella, and I figured today it is time to check out Overly Sarcastic Productions and some mythology. And what better mythology than Dionysus, who I believe is the god of wine.
Hey, bro, did you say wine?
No, dude, it's for a video.
Oh, so I should just get started without you then?
Get out of here.
All right. Let's
Anyway,
go.
like I was saying, we're going to check out some mythology today with Overly Sarcastic Productions. Welcome back, friends, and a special welcome to all the new friends out there. I'm YoBGS, one of the most requested channels since I started doing history reactions, Overly Sarcastic Productions, and I'm finally getting to take a look at some of their Greek mythology, and today it's Dionysus, which, I mean, wine, how can you not do that, right? If you dig these videos, make sure to check and see if you're subscribed. It's the biggest thing that helps these videos get shown to more people, to make sure that I will keep making videos like this. And leave a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see. I read all the comments and it helps me out a ton. All right, first things first, I'm digging the animation style. Reminds me of when Aaron Hansen from Game Grumps used to do sequelitis. Let's see if it's as funny.
Dionysus, god of wine, life of the party, known primarily for being drunk and having some pretty intense fangirls who killed Orpheus that one time. Wears lots of leaves, not a fan of pants, spends most of the day draped in grapes and turning dudes into dolphins.
I mean, I'm here for all of that except for I don't know who Orpheus is. I know Morpheus, right? Lawrence Fishburne, he's pretty pog, but other than that... So basically, this is the god of frat bros.
Is there really more to him than that? Oh, is there? Is there ever? But we'll get to that. For now, let's start simple and cover the basics of the backstory. The official story...
Okay, I was vibing on the mythology music. Tee-hee, oh-you, tee-hee, oh boy. This looks like most stories begin here.
Backstory. The official story of Dionysus begins with Zeus, who at this point may as well change his deific designation to god of one-night stands, carrying on a semi-secret affair with the mortal woman...
It is kind of true. The family tree is like Zeus, and then like every female god or goddess, or even sometimes like mortals.
Semele. Hera, as is her wont, catches wind of their business and decides that she's tired of just outright killing Zeus's children and girlfriends, and for this particular murder, she's gonna mix it up a little with some disguises. Hera transforms into an old woman and ingratiates herself to Semele, who trusts her immediately and confides in her that her boyfriend is Zeus himself, and not only that, she's actually pregnant with his son. But Hera's like, come on, every guy pulls that I'm really Zeus stunt to get a little mortal action. How do you know for sure he's being honest with you?
To get a little mortal action. So wait, so every god has to pretend they're Zeus. It's not good enough to be a god. You have to lie about... Oh my goodness. All right, good. Gods are already hilarious.
And tells Semele she should make him prove his god status by showing her his true form. So the next time they meet up, Semele makes Zeus promise her a favor, then demands he drop the mortal shape and reveal himself in all his glory. Zeus isn't one to go back on a promise, so he gods it up a little and immediately vaporizes Semele Ark of the Covenant style. But
yep, that's kind of where I thought he was gonna go with that. Again, first world problems, being so attractive that you have to make yourself uglier to go out in public. That's going to be my excuse for the rest of my days.
Good news, sports fans. The mom may be dead, but the baby lives. Zeus takes little demigod baby Dionysus, oh yeah, that's who the baby is, by the way, and sews him into his leg, so...
Censored because in older stories, leg injuries were usually oblique, decent ways to refer to... And I ain't drawing any of that. Well...
The kid can finish growing. A few months later, Dionysus is born for realsies, and his exploits can really get started. Keep an eye on that initial theme of rebirth. It's central to some very interesting aspects of his character I'll explore later. But first, shenanigans.
Dionysus Let's go! Up for some shenanigans. You can't be a Greek semi-god, fully god, partial god without getting into some solidly decent shenanigans.
Of course, wildly unsafe on Olympus on account of Hera, so Zeus sends him away to be raised in secret. Exactly who raises him varies from telling to telling, with foster parents ranging from Hermes, the titaness Rhea, the mortal king Athamas and Queen Ino, who raise him as a girl, and even Persephone. Let's also make note of his connection to Persephone in this version. This is all going to come together later, I promise. So Dionysus grows up to young...
So I have a whiteboard, like just off screen here. I'm starting to feel like I need to fill it out. Again, overly sarcastic. Incredible job. I've learned more in 2 minutes than I think I did in most of my Greek mythology classes. Now, that is in part because I don't pay attention, but also because fantastic animation.
Adulthood and begins his classic godly exploits. He starts off by discovering how to make wine, but before he can spread this knowledge to the rest of the world, Hera drives him temporarily crazy, and he wanders around for a while before Rhea fixes his brain. Then he gets on that whole teaching the world how to make wine thing.
You just gloss over that? That feels like an entire DBZ arc here that we're missing out. Was Greek mythology really just the first anime?
Before Rhea fixes his brain. Then he gets on that whole teaching the world how to make wine thing and wanders pretty far afield. There's a story that Alexander the Pretty Alright stumbled on a town called Nyssa during his journeys along the Indus River, which they told him was founded by Dionysus during his meanderings. Dionysus is also a major cutie, which gets him in a spot of trouble when he gets abducted by sailors for unsavory purposes. Of course, they get more than they bargained for, and Dionysus responds by turning the mast and oars into snakes, filling the ship with ivy and the sound of flutes, and possibly turning into a lion. This obviously.
But if he could have done that anyway, why did he let himself get captured for unsavory purposes? Like, why did he wait until the moment of unsavoriness to rot his horrible revenge?
It terrifies and/or maddens the sailors, who leap overboard and are promptly turned into dolphins. You may be wondering, hey, how did the cheerfully drunk god of wine do all that stuff you just said? What does feral wildlife and crippling insanity have to do with a fine Chardonnay? Don't worry about that for now. We'll get there. While it's generally accepted modern canon that Hestia, goddess.
Is there a Patreon tier on Overly Simplified's Patreon where I can, like, figure out all the middle ground here? Because I feel like, wait a minute, and now, okay, so now we've ventured into the world of non-canon.
The Hearthfire gave up her seat as the 12th Olympian to Dionysus and established his godhood. There is actually no mythological precedent implying that ever happened. Listings of the 12 Olympians will generally include either Hestia or Dionysus, but not both, so people kind of assume he supplanted her, but it's not really clear or established anywhere. He also gives
Duh, how could you not know that?
Midas his golden touch, which turned out not good.
Wait, who did?
Clear or established anywhere. He also gives Midas his golden touch, which turned out not good. That was a not good thing that happened. So, now that we've established some canon for Dionysus, forget all that because there is no canon. There is only an endless...
What? Yeah. I just got caught up on the lore. You've led me on down a 3-minute primrose path here.
Deep well of mysteries and fragmented mythology, and Dionysus is much older and weirder than he seems. To start our dive down this well, a little historical context. Ancient Greece, as we generally conceive of it, got going around 700 BC.
Okay.
Before that, the civilization in the area was Mycenaean Greece, which existed between 1600 and 1100 BC. After it fell apart and the late Bronze Age collapsed, there were a few centuries of Dark Ages where nothing really got written down, and then city-states started popping up and Greece got its act together over the course of a couple hundred years, starting around 900 BC. Mycenaean Greece and ancient Greece had a pretty interesting dynamic, since although they were, practically speaking, different cultures, ancient Greece really seems to have thought of itself as a successor to Mycenaean Greece. Classics like the Iliad and the Odyssey were written in the 700s BC, but explicitly set in the legendary past of Mycenaean Greece. So it's like ancient Greece squared.
So ancient Greece is ancient Greece. By the way, it's hilarious to me that, like, we, in 2022, look at a story about the Old West that would have happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s is, like, impossibly long ago. But they, in 700 were writing about stuff like 200 years prior to that.
There's also linguistic rollover. Mycenaean is considered an early form of Greek, but was written in Linear B, a syllabic script which was replaced around 900 BC by the basically modern Greek alphabet, which in turn was derived from the Phoenician alphabet. Anyway, this is important because the majority of the Hellenistic pantheon...
Okay, we got... Top. Dionysus' name is just Top. Hermes is Amy. Hephaestus. Wait a minute, this is from How to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon. I don't think this is real. I think this was just snuck in there for people who, like, is it wrong? I always call it How to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon. I think this is just for anyone who likes, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? No, that's Hestia, not Hephaestus. Never mind.
Originated in Mycenaean Greece, and we know this because we found their names in Linear B inscriptions. Dionysus is one of those gods. In most cases, we know very little about what roles they played in the Mycenaean religion, although they seem very different from their classical Hellenized characterizations. Poseidon, for example, seems to have filled the role of head god, and he was treated more as a god of earthquakes than a god of the sea. We do know that the Mycenaean religion seems to have put
a noticeable Gothic bent, chthonic bent.
stronger focus than Hellenism did on worshipping chthonic gods, deities with connections to the underworld, and that Poseidon's Earthshaker epithet designated him as a chthonic god and might have been why he was considered so important, while Zeus, in contrast as a sky god, was barely acknowledged. There's also, fun fact, no Mycenaean equivalent to Hades, although Persephone and Demeter are both Mycenaean in origin. Anyway, regardless of
Fascinating. We've got, okay, 800 BC, the one with the silly hat that you can't see. The one with the silly hat, he's up there. Ocean god, dumb war god, the one with the plants, smart war god, king, handles all things chthonic, the ugly one, hey, shipper, okay, I know that one, that's, barnacles, queen, moon, sun, seems legit. Aphrodite. Ha! I remembered.
Who they used to be. By the time ancient Greece as we think of it got going and we started getting written records again, all those old Mycenaean gods were pretty solidly locked into their new Hellenized characterizations. Poseidon got nerfed and sidelined and had his chthonic connections minimized, chthonic gods in general were shunted to the background, sky god Zeus got to be the most important dude on the block, and everyone—
So in Mycenaean Greece, how do I play the old— I want to play the old patch. I want to play 1.0.
adjusted pretty quick.
It's better for the speedrun.
Everyone except for Dionysus.
Dionysus.
See, here's the thing. In the early days of ancient Greek historical analysis, everybody knew that Dionysus was a latecomer to the pantheon, although exactly how late is hard to pin down, but nobody really knew why. Before Linear B was deciphered, the theory was that he was an import god, since a lot of his documented myths had him coming to Greece from somewhere else, or wandering far afield before returning. But after finding his name in Mycenaean Greek inscriptions, that theory went out the window and a replacement was proposed. That
Imagine being somebody who studies ancient history, you know, like an ancient anthropologist, and they finally cracked the code regarding Linear B, and then you're sitting there and it's like, oh, my life's work is just wrong.
Dionysian worship predated ancient Greece and was deliberately suppressed for several hundred years before undergoing modification and being allowed into the Hellenistic pantheon. Since ancient Greece had kind of a known habit of not exactly promoting equality for all—
Overly sarcastic is overly genius. This is just wild.
citizens, this wasn't too crazy of a notion. In essence, what distinguishes Dionysus from the rest of his pantheon is that his character development didn't happen during the Greek Dark Ages, but several centuries after everyone else got with the program. Which is actually pretty appropriate for a guy whose most consistent character trait at this point in history was chronic drunk.
The
But
frat
why was he
bro.
so late to transition? Well, to understand that, we have to understand his cult. And to understand his cult, we have to understand who Dionysus was before he got Hellenized. So let's talk about that.
It also makes sense that he would be a frat bro because fraternity life is Greek life. So he's the patron, I guess he wasn't patron saint, the god of Greek life, Dionysus.
First of all, let's define some names. Dionysus is usually the name used for the Hellenistic characterization we've already—
God of wine, child of Zeus and Semele, primary characterization party dude, young, semi-androgynous, Hellenized, god Olympian, loved by later kings post-Alexander, has maddened followers, throws rad parties, bro. This is me.
established. Orphic Dionysus is the scary—
More of a death rebirth god, child of Zeus and Persephone, worshipped exclusively in Orphism, but seems to draw heavily from the Mycenaean original. Much more focus put on his frenzy and madness theme. Central theme, his ability to enter and leave the underworld, dies young and reborn, has horns, cool, right? So this is drunk Dionysus. So we've got sober guy and drunk guy.
the older version embraced
Right?
by the religion of Orphism, a characterization that puts the focus more on themes of death and rebirth. These two have notably different backstories. Confusing matters, Orphic Dionysus has been equated with another figure called Zagreus, and it's unclear whether this was a later syncretism or an early case of multiple names for one god. Orphism, side note, was a 6th century BC religion that basically boiled down to an attempt to understand life and death. It mostly worshipped gods or figures that entered the underworld and left alive, like Orpheus, hence the name Orphic. Other noteworthy figures of worship included Persephone, for fairly obvious reasons. But working from this definition, it's unclear why Dionysus would have caught the attention of a cult focused on death and rebirth when it seems like the farthest we can stretch his characterization at this point is drunk and rowdy. What connection did Dionysus have with the underworld that would cause an Orphic cult to favor him?
I don't
Let's
know.
talk about an older story of Dionysus' birth. The first difference between Orphic Dionysus and plain vanilla Dionysus is that he's the son of Zeus and Persephone, while in older fragmentary myths, Zagreus is instead the son of Hades and Persephone. Whichever way the parentage swings, Orphic Dionysus is slated to inherit Zeus' status as king of the gods, which enrages Hera, who gets a bunch of titans to murder baby Orphic Dionysus by ripping him apart and eating him. Athena saves his heart,
Why eat him? Why save his heart?
and with Zeus's help gets him reborn, either by doing the leg implant thing again or sticking the heart in Semele so she can grow a baby around it. Either way, Orphic Dionysus gets reborn after being ritualistically shredded and gets on with the whole being a god thing. This myth predates his Semele parentage and possibly predates ancient Greece overall, since the Mycenaean characterization also featured this theme of dying and being reborn early in life. It handily contextualizes both his theme of rebirth and his weird connection with Persephone that we touched on earlier, as well as giving him an unexpected link with the underworld that we don't see much of in his later characterization. This is strengthened by his Zagreus epithet. Zagreus in his earliest references isn't explicitly connected.
Can someone give me the backstory on Overly Sarcastic and how they know everything? Just a question, you know, just asking questions here. Everything we know about Zagreus. All right.
Connected with Dionysus, but he is strongly linked with Hades and the underworld in general. In his earliest references, from around the 600s BC, it's not even clear if he and Hades are different entities, and he's hugely important in the underworld hierarchy. Zagreus as a standalone entity seems to have been a very important chthonic god, and by appending his name to Dionysus, Dionysus inherits his strong underworld connections. Going back as far as we can, the Mycenaean inscription.
Okay, very limited information. Theme of death and rebirth due to dying and being reborn, son of Zeus, mother unclear, abandoned young, raised by nature. Has a wine cult, appearance-wise, likely horned and bearded, older and more mature, so like a druid.
We have confirmed that Dionysus' death and rebirth, as well as his status as a son of Zeus, were original elements of his characterization, not later additions by his Orphic cult.
How do they
He's also got some themes of
together?
being abandoned by humanity and raised by nature, which might play into his later nature and animalistic associations. So this gives us something of a starting point. Dionysus enters the ancient Greek world as a god of death and rebirth with strong connections to the underworld. Those underworld connections appeal to the later Orphic religious movement, causing his characterization to get a bit schizophrenic as they put focus on an element of his characterization otherwise largely being left behind. Anyway, this alternative birth myth gives us something of a feel for where his characterization started, but doesn't really explain why he would have been excluded from the Hellenistic pantheon. And we also haven't put together where his wine connection came from yet. So now let's talk about what his personal cult can tell us about the rest of his characterization. The Cult of Dionysus.
Aw, I was vibing. The cult was smart and realized wine makes cults better.
This was, unfortunately for us, a mystery cult, meaning its exact rituals and practices were kept secret from outsiders.
I got so excited I was hitting all the wrong buttons. See, it was his leg. This is nothing, there's nothing gonad related about this.
We have pieced together the basics. For one thing, it predates ancient Greece by a wide margin, and might even predate Mycenaean Greece in one form or another. It also most likely started off less as
in the beginning, there was booze.
as a Dionysus cult and more as a wine cult, worshipping the state of intoxication and the liberation from societal inhibitions that came with it, because wine predates Mycenaean Greece and consequently Dionysus, and the wine cult is very focused on wine and the effects thereof, with the Dionysian aspect almost seeming secondary. It's even possible that the wine cult originated around the same time wine did, aka 6000 BC, making it—
See, my question is now, did wine exist before food? Did we learn how to cultivate grapes before we learned how to cultivate wheat?
very old. Old as balls.
No, because we would give you hops, and hops would get you drunk too.
If this is true, it also probably originated in this place called the Zagros Mountains, which, yes, does sound a lot like Zagreus. This would be a really convenient etymological link if the two words were actually connected, but sadly they are not. Still a neat coincidence. Anyway, if this theory holds, the cult probably followed wine export routes to wind up in Egypt and then Minoan Crete, and then Mycenaean Greece where it scooped up Dionysus and made him its own. Really, for our purposes, it doesn't matter where or when the wine cult started, just that it wound up in Mycenaean Greece one way or another. The short of it is, a wine-centric cult popped up in the area, and one way or another, Mycenaean Dionysus got wrapped up into it, turning it into a localized Dionysian cult, and potentially affecting his early Mycenaean characterization to incorporate the invention of wine in the first place.
Dang. And, like, you have to— I'm gonna rewatch this video when I'm done just to pick up on all the things I missed out on. But I was gonna say, you know, there's nothing wrong with being a wine cultist, I feel. If the alternatives for what you're gonna do with your life are that, or, you know, accountant, wine cultist traveling across the hinterlands seems pretty exciting.
I don't really know though, since the records are limited and to a certain extent we're playing around in the recordless Dark Ages, but it would make sense. So by the time the Dark Ages wrapped up, the Cult of Dionysus was firmly established and centered on the Dionysian Mysteries, which was this ritual that predominantly focused on getting crazy stupid high. Whoa,
Let's
Dionysus,
go!
the 70s.
I gotta see that again, that was hilarious.
Getting crazy stupid high. Whoa, Dionysus, the 70s called. They want to know if they can borrow some of your stash. See, intoxication was at this point considered a form—
Let's see, sober person plus wine, Dionysus symbolically linked with wine. A drunk and high person, Dionysus is linked with the person.
of possession by Dionysus' spirit, which in turn allowed the cult members to theoretically tap into his divine power, along with the primordial, inhibitionless subconscious mind that Dionysus' madness could release. There was also some pretty hefty symbolism linking the transformation of living grapes into fermented wine with Dionysus' transformative rebirth. Anyway, the whole point was liberation, catharsis, and a connection to the divine, as well as drunken insanity, crazy music and dancing, and symbolic recreations of Dionysus' death and rebirth.
1, it seemed to have worked, and 2, I'm glad I don't have an eye tracker on for this video.
A lot of dismemberment happened. Like a lot. Mostly to bulls because they were symbolic of Dionysus, but it also happened to other stuff. Ever wonder why Orpheus got ripped apart by those ladies that one time? It's this. He died for a sweet literary reference. He was an artist, it's what he would have wanted. Unsurprisingly, Dionysus' cult attracted a lot of marginalized people, like women, slaves, and non-citizens, because it gave them the opportunity to reject the societal constraints getting dumped on them. Double unsurprisingly, this cult wasn't very popular with the society that made those constraints, which led to several centuries worth of attempts from various ancient Greek governments to outlaw the cult altogether, which never ever worked because wine and parties and sticking it to the man, will never die. So after this had failed enough times, eventually Greece
as long as there's been the man, there's been one person wanting to stick it to the man.
On trying to control it a little bit, resulting in the establishment and gradual acceptance of the more chilled-out Hellenistic Dionysus we all know and love. It's tricky to put dates to this sort of deific character evolution, but we've got a few concrete milestones to work from. To start with, Dionysus is explicitly not in the Olympic pantheon during the 8th century BC, because that's when the Iliad and the Odyssey were written, and Dionysus is notably nowhere to be found. He and Hestia are the only ones of the traditional 12 Olympians to not be referenced. So
Ha! Hestia. I knew the reference was going to be somewhere.
This is a very noteworthy exclusion. Dionysus was officially integrated into Athens somewhere between 561 and 527 BC, because that's the duration of the reign of famous tyrant Pisistratus, who first brought the Dionysia to Athens. The Dionysia was a formerly rural celebration honoring
I pissed my Stratus back in grade school. They never let me forget it.
Dionysus and celebrating the cultivation of wine. When Pisistratus imported it to Athens, it grew to incorporate a competition of performances and plays, which eventually produced the field of Greek theater overall. At this point, however, one gets the impression that Dionysus still wasn't fully popular with the Athenians, as Pisistratus justified the importation of the Dionysia with a myth that outlined all the horrifying things Dionysus could and would do to the dongs of the Athenians who rejected him. This is not a joke, and is also why the Dionysia would feature a parade of people carrying sculpted junk. Contemporary imagery of Dionysus also usually recalled an older visual, where he sported a beard and had an overall mature look, so at this point Dionysus has landed in Athens but hasn't fully transitioned to his popular young drunk hippie characterization yet. The next milestone comes to us from Euripides, who provides us with a literary missing link in the form of the Bacchae.
I love that after 115 years of being rejected, he's like, I need more. Cut more off. That'll help.
First performed in 405 BC at the Dionysia Festival. The Bacchae shows us a Dionysus in roughly the middle of his transition from terrifying god of uninhibited madness to party guy, as he returns to Greece from a globetrotting exile with an army of Maenads to claim his divine status and take revenge on a king who outlawed his worship. This Dionysus is the child of Zeus and Semele, born prematurely, roughly in accordance with the Hellenistic version we discussed earlier. But in this case, the people of Thebes refuse to believe his divine origins, so he drives them crazy and claims them as his followers. After a sufficiently large number of shenanigans involving natural disasters and plagues of madness, Dionysus begins to warp King Pentheus' sanity, who begins to see through Dionysus' mortal disguise and notices that he has horns, another holdover from the older, scarier characterization that didn't make it to the Hellenized edition.
These are the most, it's so hard to follow, and I guess it's because, right, tribalism wasn't really, I'm not gonna phrase it that way, but history and stories, obviously, it was like a game of telephone, I guess is what I'm going for, where you tell something to someone or they read something, and then they kind of add their own twist to it as they pass it along to the next person as things start to get teleported around the world, essentially, and that's how you end up with all these...
Pentheus winds up getting dismembered by...
And I know I'm stating the obvious, it's just me you're hearing me verbally digesting all of this information.
Dionysus' Maenads, including some of Pentheus' female relatives, and it's a happy ending. Or at least a cathartic one. This mid-transition Dionysian characterization shows us a Dionysus with a mortal mother, no explicit death and rebirth, a serious temper, no regard for the social structures that reject him, an army of crazed followers, the ability to induce madness and hallucinations in whoever he wants, and horns. Despite the absence of his dismemberment and rebirth in his Bacchae backstory, the theme has still held on in his worship, which is why Pentheus is dismembered in such a familiar way despite lacking the immediate mythical context. It also shows us that by 400 BC, Dionysus was basically considered an Olympian, even if his characterization wasn't quite all happy, fun, drunk just yet.
But when does he get over, right? It's like we're most of the way through the video and he's not been accepted yet as cool dude. Although that happens with most frat guys. You know, like people kind of ironically tolerate frat guys, which I feel like is sort of what's going on with Dionysus here.
I should probably just make the Bacchae its own video. But even though Dionysus has attained a level of chill deemed acceptable by polite Athenian society, he's still not really recognizable as the party dude we all know and love. He's getting there, but he's not there yet. So what's next? Well, here's the deal with that. The century after Euripides, a little something happened to Greece called Alexander the Great Gets All Up in Everyone's Business, during which time Alexander the Alright conquered his way through Persia, the Levant, and Egypt, radically expanding the ancient Greek world and paving the way for centuries of luxury for the kings that ruled this expanded.
So my wild guess is gonna be because now all of this has become a part of the situation, these people over here love Dionysus, and they're gonna spread the love up to their
Hellenistic world. These kings focused on two things and two things only: power and parties. And wouldn't you know it, there was an Olympian all set and ready to embody both of those things. Post the 300s BC, Dionysus' popularity exploded as the ruling class began embracing his extravagance and unrestrained party vibe, with the convenient undertone that Dionysus had been characterized as a conqueror for the past couple centuries, leading these kings to embrace—
No! You can't just do that! You can— Dionysus' character is like, it has the basics of a storyline and then just pages of, oh, by the way.
His image even more strongly. Some of them even acted like they were Dionysus, but like incarnated or something. A cult that had previously belonged largely to marginalized communities that threatened the ruling class was suddenly being embraced by that ruling class because, frankly, the Cult of Dionysus threw the best parties.
This is how you get hipsters, because now the members of the cult are going to be talking about how they were a part of the cult before it became a part of society, and you have yield hipster.
What with all the wealth and power they had to throw around, the Hellenistic kings didn't really want to do anything but party. And with that, Dionysus completes his transformation from death god to party animal. Thanks to the nationalization of his cult during the Hellenistic period, Dionysus, or Bacchus as he was commonly called at this point, settled into his recognizable modern-day characterization, leaving the majority of his more alarming character traits behind. But this goes a long way towards explaining the lingering idiosyncrasies in his characterization.
Dude, and we thought multiple Batmans was a terrible thing. You know what I'm saying? You can't... Look, at least the Val Kilmer Batman was closer to the Christopher Nolan Batman than Dionysus 1 was to Final Form Dionysus.
Dionysus probably had one of the most radical transformations in the entire pantheon, and while the toned-down recognizable version was mostly chill, he never completely lost the old-school death and madness god he used to be worshipped as. To torture a metaphor, both Dionysus and Greek wine were watered down for potability, but that didn't make them lose their inherent intoxicating properties. This also goes a long way to explaining why a pantheon of gods with concepts as big as war and wisdom and the entire ocean would bother having a god on the prayer roll whose entire job was being drunk. Closing time.
Of course they would, though. Went to the script like, Dionysus, I already know all his myths. Just be a short filler video, I'll work on my longer projects.
Open all the doors and let you out into—
Oh, how wrong I was. Yes, you were.
Closing
Something in mythology looks simple and clear cut. It's a trap. It's always a trap. There's thousands of years of context just waiting to strike and confuse everything. Dionysus is not a word I feel should ever require pluralizing, and yet during the creation of this video, I found myself saying Dionysi multiple times. It felt so wrong.
One last call for alcohol.
What about the low energy delivery on the song? I lost my voice for about a week before recording it and had to come in and concentrate to hit the notes. I mean, it's still kicking ass.
Whiskey or beer.
Shout out to the 5-tier patrons. Keeping all the lights on, paying us all of that money. Shout out to Guendeeth, Munder and Vacute, LaFlarson.
I know who I want to take me home. I know who I want to take me home. I know who I want to take me home. Take me home.
Beautiful. Awesome. Incredible. Like almost everything here, I've learned so much more than I thought. Again, I thought Greek god, stories about partying, getting drunk, people maybe rioted, and that would be the entire story. But no, it was like the transformation, and I know I downplayed this in most of the video. It's ridiculous to see how history evolves. It's wild to see how a myth, a legend can then be changed to fit different times, different people, different population centers and ultimately wind its way back around to what we know about 2,000 plus years later. So, you guys were right. Overly Sarcastic kicks all of the butt. That was amazing. If you know of any other channels that are this amazing, please let me know in the comments down below. If you like watching along with these with me, if you like the vibe here, check and make sure you're subscribed. It helps the channel out infinitely more than you imagine. So take care, as always, my friends, and I will see you for the next myth, for the next legend.